may read from the back, where I tie the theoretical problems to a dozen further objects to give context in the field of material history. Throughout, I argue how Nazi-era objects are especially vulnerable to opportunistic narratives, as screens for our fantasies, our projections, in the absence of their owners and careful detective work. This object history of memory is being written at an urgent turning point, one of generational change. The public health emergency of COVID-19 has disproportionately affected the war generation. Consider the following. A 22-year-old in the last year of the Second World War is 99 years old in 2022. Most of the witnesses for this book were about this age when interviewed. They are the last witnesses. I am worried what happens to their belongings when they are gone, because on their own, these things don't speak. Line them up on a table, try talking to them one by one, and I bet you won't get a word out of them. It's as if they were charmed, and their story is only summoned by those people who had direct experience of this most violent moment in world history. This momentary spell gives the objects value. The line between the junkyard and the museum is a good story. Since knowing their stories as you will, it's become difficult for me to see the objects as just flotsam. It pains me to imagine them collecting dust on the shelf of a second-hand shop or in a storage locker. But a generation that has not experienced war, whose members are unable to interpret the jetsam of the past, will more easily discard or misinterpret these things. Think of a belonging of sentimental value you own, an engagement ring, an admission ticket, a stone from a beach, which will become meaningless the moment you are no longer there to tell its story. It is no coincidence that resurgent nationalism and xenophobia gain ground, and not just in Germany, as we lose those who saw their extreme consequences. Because many stories can be spun from these objects, but not all of them are true. Berlin, December 2021. My grandfather's knife. The knife. My grandfather kept a knife with a swastika on the wall in his basement. When I was small, he took me down to see it, and it frightened me. It hung cold from its hook, surrounded by other weapons the veteran had collected or inherited. There was the riding crop and the sword of my great-great-grandfather, a colonel from the Boer War. The colonel's sword was imbued with positive feelings. The material was bright and shiny and silver, and I had read enough fairy tales to want a sword. But even at the age of 6 or 7, I knew to distrust the knife in its scabbard. I did not have the words then, nor really now, to describe its negativity. Was it the silver eagle's head, decorated with carved feathers, that it was bolted with a layer of bone, human, below the elaborately carved hilt of laurels? Was it the scabbard of worn leather for the ferocious blade that had brushed against some trouser leg? When my grandfather took it down from the wall and unsheathed it, the knife made an efficient sound, a slide and a click. This was so unlike the elegantly resounding ring of the colonel's sword. And when he lowered it into my hands, I looked into the blank eye of the eagle. I examined all the X's carved into the silver of its hilt. I turned it over, fascinated with the insignia of the eagle, wings spread, also wreathed with laurel leaves, all surmounting the swastika. My grandfather told me that he had liberated the knife as a captain in the Canadian forces in 1944 or 1945 in the Netherlands. My father told me a different story, perhaps to protect me, which was that he found it in the mud somewhere. At that age, the word liberate was a positive one. I did not for a moment think that it could be a euphemism for capturing or killing the enemy. Many years later, after my studies and time spent living in many places, with possessions scattered between college storage, my parents' house, and lockers in Cambridge, New York, Nottingham, Vancouver, and Edmonton, I settled down and ended up living in the capital of my grandfather's enemy. I have been living among the defeated in Berlin for more than a decade now. My grandfather died in 2005, and I never paid much attention to his will except for a couple of details. He left me both my great-great-grandfather's sword and his Nazi knife. The sword was outside normal baggage restrictions. It's still in my parents' basement, and I wonder if I should transport it with golf clubs one day. But the Nazi knife had vanished. No one knew what had happened to it. Thank goodness, my aunt told me. It was so horrific. Stuff like that should just disappear.